Okay, we're ready to go. Hello, stream. Hello, everyone in the room. Before I start, can I just get an idea of who you are? Who works in the games industry currently here? A few people. Who is a student and wants to work in the games industry? Right, okay, that's that's a fairly good split. Good, I know who I'm talking to, that's always important. So, yeah, my company is Mode 7, and this talk is going to be a bit about kind of where we came from, the last 10 years working in indie game development, and also partially about how indie game development has changed in the last 10 years. It's been very rapid, kind of lots of unexpected shifts, but also sort of mirroring some other periods of games history. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I am Paul Kilduff-Taylor. Hello. Previously, I was known as Paul Taylor, but I decided that when I got married, what I really wanted was a name that nobody can either spell or pronounce. So with that in mind, here are some of my favourite misspellings of my name. Kildoff, kind of straightforward there, just a letter substitution, missing out a fundamental part of the name. Kilvuss, bit more creativity there, some interesting letter substitution, a bit of a better Scrabble score. Kidduff, I like this one because it sounds a little bit like someone bouncing a basketball off the head of an unsuspecting passerby. Kilduff-Taylor. Now, when people get my name wrong, they normally get the harder part of the name wrong, so I kind of appreciated this. Again, showing creativity, going for the end of the name. This is a recent one that I've just added to this section. They've taken the whole name and kind of concatenated my middle initial with the forename to create the name Paulge, which I'm thinking of adopting. And finally, this is my absolute favourite one. This is a major games industry conference where I was billed as Paul Kilduff-Johnson. Yeah, that's right, Paul Kilduff-Johnson. Anyway, that's more than enough about me. Yes, Mode 7, we're currently working on this game, which I'm going to show you a little bit about later, Frozen Synapse 2. It's a tactical game, which contains also some big sort of open world elements, an entire procedurally generated city, where you can go into any building in the city and do a mission in that building. And it kind of looks like this. Nice and glowy. We're going for a sort of abstract look that enables us to do a lot of different things visually, represent a lot of different stuff without very expensive art assets. We are also a publisher now. We just announced the first game that we're going to be publishing from a company called Smack Games. Now, they're debut indie developers. They're two brothers, and they're making this game in their kitchen in a flat in London. It's called Tokyo 42. We just released a trailer for that. Some of you might have seen that. I'm going to show you that again later. But this is a really interesting action game, kind of inspired by Amiga era, early sort of DOS games like Syndicate, Worms, stuff like that. And set again in an open world, but this time in a sort of colourful, miniature, cyberpunky Tokyo. So we're really excited to be publishing that, working very closely with the team, and trying to allow them to fulfil their exciting vision for that. Right, I'm going to take you back in time now. And it's not something that I do lightly, because this is our first game. It's called Determinants, and it was terrible. It was a really bad game. It had a stupid name. It had really quite bad collision, which, as I described the game, which will become increasingly salient as to why that was bad. So Determinants was a game where you controlled your sword with the mouse. You had full analog control, kind of like a game called Die by the Sword, if anyone remembers that game. One person in the audience is nodding, but very surreptitiously so as not to give themselves away. Die by the Sword, again, was a game where you kind of ended up waving your sword around like this with very vague mouse control. But we thought, you know, analog control of the sword is a brilliant new idea. Nobody's ever done it before. We had so many technical limitations. You can see all the characters are flying here because we couldn't make them walk. It was something that people absolutely hated. And the whole aesthetic was very confused, and the mechanics kind of didn't work very well. But this was such a formative game for us. It was started in kind of, I think, almost 2002-03 by my business partner Ian Hardingham, and he was at university and he'd done a lot of work in a game engine called the Talk engine, which was used for this game, Tribes 2. Sorry, I have to lean over and interrupt my speech to change slides, but I'm sure you can put up with that little bit of latency. Tribes 2 was a really exciting multiplayer game where you kind of zoomed and skied around these gigantic mountains, and you had an array of weapons, and it was a very skill-based game. You had to get really good at aiming, really good at targeting in order to kind of hit your opponents, and it had this amazing engine. Now, the Talk engine was kind of the unity of its era. It was a really fully featured engine, but you had full source access as well, which was amazing. So Ian learned how to program in C++ and in this engine when he was at university and decided to make a game. And as I said, Determinants came out in sort of 2007, but we were working on it kind of right through just the end of being at university. And we started to get involved with indie games as they were in 2005. But there were a few sort of early things happening just before that time. And this is one of them. This is a game called Uplink by Introversion Software, and it was released in October 2001, which is a ludicrously long time ago. And it was originally released on disc, on CD, and they would post you the CD. They also had a retail distribution deal to get the game into some stores. Uplink was a really kind of influential and formative game for us as well. When I first played it, I didn't know who made it. I actually assumed for some reason that they were a German company. I'm not quite sure why, but they're British. And it really proved that a really small team could make a game that was sort of as exciting as a AAA game, but just not with the same sort of level of graphical polish. And this was kind of a really, really early stage. So Introversion were actually pioneering this. I think that's kind of been forgotten a little bit in their history, as they've now done Prison Architect, which is a massive, massive, mega popular game now. But they actually started off really innovating, certainly in the UK, this modern era of indie dev. So indie games around this time, and this is as late as 2005, they kind of looked like this generally. They looked really, really janky, weird, sort of systems-oriented games that didn't have a lot of polish. And they tended to get featured in the kind of weird column in the magazine. PC Gamer has a column called Oddball that Tim Edwards wrote, and he put Determinants in that. We were really happy about that because we got in a magazine, even though it was in the Oddball column. But this game, Armadillo Run, which I think was 2005, maybe slightly earlier, was a physics-based game. So you had to construct these structures out of sort of struts and kind of elastic things and fabrics as well, which is really cool. You had to get the armadillo, which is that ball, into the circle. And this came out and it got reviewed properly in the magazines. And we saw this, like, wow, an indie game can get treated the same way as a massive big game. And it got quite good scores. I think it got sort of 80%, mid 80%. And that was really exciting to us as well, because it just sort of, it showed that there was scope for this whole range of different possible ideas within indie games. Here's another game, Ragdoll Kung Fu, which was the first indie game on Steam, 2006, made by a guy called Mark Healy, who went on to found Media Molecule, of course, who've done Little Big Planet and Tearaway and all those things. And this, again, was a physics-based game. So indie games really had this association with being sort of quirkily based around a single technological innovation. So these characters had kind of rubbery limbs, and you could drag them around like puppets, and you could fight with them. And he was working at Lionhead at the time, and through that he was able to get in contact with Valve, and Valve sort of, I think, flew him out to Seattle and said, "Oh, we're thinking of distributing your game." So they enabled Valve to kind of pioneer the use of Steam for smaller titles, and obviously, kind of, we all know how that's gone. That's enabled a lot of the indie game development sort of on a commercial scale that we see now. So this was a really, really interesting game, and I remember talking to Mark around that time and emailing him and saying, "Hey, you got a game on Steam? How did that work?" And he replied and gave me loads of advice and was really, really helpful. And that's one of the things that's always attracted me to indie games and working in them, is the collaborative nature of it as an environment, definitely in this country. Everyone's willing to help each other out and discuss things and talk to each other. And as indie games has exploded in size, that's part of the culture of it that I think is really important, that we should hang on to. So yeah, a great game and much deserved success, again, from its creator. This is a game called Super Columbine Massacre RPG, which also came out around the same time. And this was another really big turning point for me. It's a hugely controversial game, obviously, because of its subject matter. You play the Columbine killers in this kind of parody JRPG. And it got entered for various awards, and I think it was nominated for one and then kicked out of that festival for its content. And this was the first time that a game on this scale had tackled a really difficult subject, a subject that no publisher would ever touch, that no commercial project would ever touch. So using indie games as a vehicle for creative expression, for dealing with difficult ideas, this started way, way, way back, even in that sort of early modern phase of indie games. And it's something to remember when games come out sort of now that are dealing with tough themes, that's been going on for a really long time. Even before this, obviously, but just sort of kicking off with this kind of thing, specifically in the early 2000s. After that, you got a wave of really commercial indie games. Here are two famous ones. World of Goo, which was a massive hit on mobile platforms, probably the first time that had happened, with a PC game sort of transferring really well onto there. And of course Braid, which is still very well known today because of its creator Jonathan Blow and The Witness and all of that stuff. But again, another threshold, realizing that you could make a lot of money from these games if they hit. They weren't just things that could support, one person or two people. They were real businesses. World of Goo has been phenomenal for its creators, kind of enabling them to go on and partially found Indie Fund, which is a fund that I'm part of that invests in indie game development. And of course, Braid was a game that sort of absolutely broke the mold for console-based indie gaming on Xbox Live, and set Jonathan Blow up to be this legendary game developer, enabling him to go on and do the things he's done since. So there were these different thresholds, and this was another really key breakthrough point when money started coming into indie games sort of as a scene. It really changed everything. It changed people's expectations. So that's the kind of context that we were in. So we'd made this game that wasn't particularly good. It really didn't make any money. Off the back of that, we got contract work, and we were able to kind of keep going based on the income that generated. So we were seeing all of this stuff happen. And when we moved on to making our next game, a more ambitious title, we decided that we wanted to put together some different influences that we'd had from past games and see if we could fit somewhere into this indie game landscape. So this was one of the major influences. This is a game called Laser Squad Nemesis, which is a fantastic game from Julian Gollop, the creator of XCOM. The last time I talked about this, I said Julian Gollop, the creator of XCOM, and I looked over and he was standing at the back of my presentation, which is extremely disturbing. So maybe he's not around today, hopefully. No, he's very nice. These games are absolutely fantastic, but they had some key problems. One of them being that it took a really long time to get into a fight. When you had all of your units kind of positioned in an interesting way, it was really cool sort of thinking about where they were all going to move and such. But it took a huge amount of time to get through that setup phase. You had to kind of hunt around for where the enemy were. You had to shuffle your guys into position, trying to not use up too many sort of time units on the way to getting there. And we thought that was a problem that you could potentially solve with a different type of game design. The other thing that we wanted to bring to Frozen Synapse, specifically what Ian, its lead designer, wanted to bring, was his experience playing Counter-Strike. In Counter-Strike, if you know when your enemy is going to come around a corner, you can kill them. So it's a very sort of binary thing. If you're a skilled player, you'll develop your skill to the point where it's not sort of really a decision. It's more of a kind of, you're trying to look at the higher level of the game, which corner are they going to go around next based on their movement previously, based on the sort of bluff and double bluff of the team's movement. So taking that and putting that into a tactical game, combined with the stuff from Laser Squad Nemesis, was the core idea. And that led us to this. We went for a very sparse look, again, something I talked about at the start, something that enables you to do a lot with your imagination, but not have to spend a huge amount of money on art assets. And that ended up working very well. We refined the interface down to being something a bit more modern. It didn't have big sort of taskbars that you clicked on. It was all sort of based around the units. And we went for quite ambitious stuff. So we had online multiplayer, and for an indie game, most multiplayer indie games up to that point had almost completely failed because they couldn't sustain a community. So we made a turn-based game that would stay alive with a very small number of players. All you have to do is kind of know one other person who's willing to play with you, and you can commit a turn and they can get it, in a couple of days and send it back to you. Kind of a modern version of play by email, if you will. So that was another thing that we sort of, I'd say innovated, but kind of took from older games. Laser Squad Nemesis actually had literal play by email, where you could email turn files back and forth. And we decided to do that, but sort of in a client-server way. And Frozen Synapse did very well for us. It came out in 2011, sort of around that sort of next phase after Braid, I want to call it, where more games were getting on Steam. Valve were approaching developers and inviting certain games to get on Steam, and Rock Paper Shotgun wrote a great write-up of our beta for Frozen Synapse, and that incited Valve to get in touch with us and say, have you considered putting your game on Steam? And my thought at the time was, yeah, I have considered that, actually. Thank you. And this was around the time things were really starting to kick off. So Super Meat Boy in 2008, Spelunky there, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which was kind of more of a AAA-ish indie game, hugely popular, and one of the first games that really got sort of YouTube on board with really pushing an indie game. A lot of those early YouTubers sort of, even aside from all the Minecraft stuff, a lot of the things they were doing were reacting to horror games. And Amnesia was sort of the first indie horror game that really, really captured that. So indie games have been there at the start of all these games industry innovations, and they continue to be now, which is really exciting. And finally, Fez, which took so long to come out that it was almost a hangover from the previous era of indie games, but kind of really summed up this time for me as well. Something that was hugely ambitious, just crazy in terms of its scope, and came out to sort of massive critical acclaim and attention. So we'd had Frozen Synapse, it had done well, and we've been through this era of sort of bigger, better, more in-depth indie games, and we wanted to do something that took the Frozen Synapse idea and then put it in this huge new context. So we made this game, Frozen Cortex. And this was taking the Frozen Synapse idea, but it was placing it in a kind of futuristic sports environment, almost like sort of Speedball meets Blood Bowl kind of thing, and with randomly generated pitches as well. Lots of chat with the AI opponents, things like that, a really kind of big, involved league, single-player, multiplayer. And this game didn't do as well. It did okay. Some people have said it's a failure. It's definitely not a failure. It's done fine for us commercially and critically as well. But it didn't kind of catch on. And I think what we'd done was sort of take the wrong input from all of the indie games that were happening at the time. This thing about needing to push the art really far and needing to kind of almost compete with AAA in some ways. And that wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. So it's very difficult when I see people's new projects now. What I tend to look for, certainly sort of in our publishing capacity and in an investment capacity as well, is things that have a really distinctive, stylized, personal, artistic vision, rather than trying to sort of go big and polished. I think we have some distinctive stylistic stuff in Frozen Cortex. I think the main thing that kind of undermined it slightly was its concept. A lot of people weren't sure about the futuristic sports idea, which is fine. But what I really want to see in an indie game, both as someone who plays them, as someone who appreciates them aesthetically, and as someone who is running a business that's based on indie games, is that individuality and that keying into a concept that the creator really wants to make, that people are going to really want to. Yeah, Frozen Cortex looked nice. We put a lot of effort into these kind of big particle effects and kind of exciting tackles and hits and everything. And if you like the style of game, if you're willing to buy into the premise, it's still really cool. The artists that we had who worked on it were absolutely brilliant, Martin Binfield and Richard Whitelock. There's some stuff about it that I think is a little bit underrated, so I need to push it a bit. Right, we're going to go even further back in time now to after Frozen Cortex. We kind of reevaluated some of the things that we thought about game development, and we went back to basics. So this is a box. You probably wouldn't recognize it now. Back in the day, games used to be sold in big boxes like this, and you'd go into a game store. I think the one in Oxford was called Future Zone, which is a much more exciting name for a retail store than game. You should really pick that up again. Future Zone, you went in there and there were a lot of things that you hadn't even heard of before because there was no internet and magazines were a bit patchy. So I was a really big fan of the game Wing Commander, which is a space sort of shooty game. And I saw this, which is Wing Commander and something called Strike Commander, but it's Wing Commander Privateer, which I'd never heard of. So I immediately picked up this box and had a look at the back. And on the back, it says, you probably can't read it, it says, "Be what you want to be." And it quickly became apparent that Wing Commander Privateer is an open world Wing Commander game. And I hadn't even conceived of an open world game by that point. You could go to any planet in this huge, vast sort of sector of the galaxy. You could do trading, you could take missions, you could be a mercenary, all of that stuff. You could explore the Wing Commander world. And I really loved the Wing Commander world at the time, so the idea of exploring it was incredibly exciting. And then Strike Commander is the sort of ludicrous Top Gun parody version of Wing Commander, where you're a sort of near-future F-16 pilot, and you fly around and take part in all these things. And both those things just appealed to me so much. So to see them together was incredible. So obviously I bought this. I opened it up, and the first thing you see when you open up the box is this magazine, which is about your fictional adventures as a near-future F-16 mercenary pilot. And people really put a huge amount of effort into these things at the time. It had fake adverts, it had all of this different stuff. It was absolutely amazing. And I used to open game boxes on the bus back home and take the manuals out and read them. And I took this out and read it, and it was absolutely blown away. And I was trying to think about what is it about that experience that's good. Obviously, you don't have that now because you get a lot of previews and a lot of preamble and stuff about games very early on, and you don't have the physical stuff. And the thing for me was, it's really just about the core fantasy of the game being exciting. If you want to do the thing that the game is offering, and the game also has this coherent world into which a lot of detail and effort has been placed, that's so romantic and so exciting to a player. And the really, really good indie games managed to capture some of that spirit. Hyperlight Drifter, which came out yesterday, is another indie game which really has this. As soon as you see a screenshot of it, you're like, I want to go there, and I want to explore, and I want to figure out all the stuff that I can do as a player in that world. So for me, the idea of a game being about entering a world is really important. And for Ian, the lead designer in our company, he really likes the way in which game mechanics work inside that world to help generate the atmosphere. So he's a mechanics-oriented guy, and I'm kind of an aesthetic sort of kind of narrative but conceptual-oriented person in the company. So we kind of complement each other well. Both of those things are extremely important, but the core fantasy of a game, I think, matters massively. That's what Strike Commander actually looked like, by the way. It doesn't look like much now, but it was pretty cool. You could fly around and do stuff. This is another game that inspired us when we were thinking about sort of formative things. This is Magic Carpet. Another game which had a big sort of free-form world. You're a wizard and flying around on a carpet, and you can shoot stuff, you can build buildings, you kind of end up taking over territory and stuff. A really underrated game these days. It's not held up as a sort of massive classic game, but go and play it. It's on Good Old Games. And the other wizards in Magic Carpet were bots. They played the game the same way as you did. They had their own AI. And that's something that we've kind of revisited again in Frozen Synapse 2 that I'll talk about a bit in a minute. But again, the romanticism of entering this sort of world, etc. Finally, this is a more modern game that we think it really embodies these values. And Paradox are a publisher who really understand this idea about depth and about players getting excited by systems and transferring themselves into a world. This is called Crusader Kings 2. I really recommend playing this game if you haven't. It's quite an impenetrable game. You basically are a ruler in a kind of European nation, and you have to set up your dynasty. So you have to go around kind of conquering countries, doing diplomacy negotiations with other countries, but you're also always thinking about your lineage. Who are you going to marry? Who are your family going to marry? And what are their children going to do? And it's this, the scope of this game is absolutely incredible. It really allows you to do and think about things that other games don't allow you to do and think about. And when you're coming up with a game concept, or if you're sort of working on an early stage project, thinking about the scope of what the player's fantasy can be, I guess, is really important. Right, that's the end of Waffle. I think we've got a little bit more time, so I'm going to show you a little bit of Frozen Synapse 2 and a little bit of Tokyo 42 as well. So please just bear with me while I rootle around in my file structure to find those things. Okay, cool. This is Frozen Synapse 2. I think probably some of you have seen the trailer, so I'm not going to bore you with that right now. But this is just a little demo of gameplay. So every single one of these buildings in the procedurally generated city has a function and an owner. So it really, really exists. The thing we've been showing in trailers of all these buildings and stuff, it exists in the game right now. This is a super, super early alpha version that shouldn't be allowed out in public. With the factions, you can interact with any of the leaders, you can look at them, you can see all the buildings that we own. Here we found a bank. We're going to send a squad to go and have a look at that bank. You can have as many squads as you want. So the kind of premise of the game is that you've been sent into this city to run a force to investigate these mysterious incursions, kind of like XCOM Apocalypse, if you ever played that game, which had a sort of simulated city. So here what we've done, we've sent our squads off. All the different factions within the city can offer you contracts, so you have that kind of that mercenary thing going on, some of the older influences there. Here you can see your squad moving along the map, and you can bump into other squads from other factions and interact with them and decide what your response should be. But But when you reach a building, you have a whole load of different choices. So you can decide to just loiter outside to put pressure on the owner of the building, or you can go and attack it straight away. So here we've attacked a bank. It's just showing off some of the different terrain and stuff we have in this version. We can do trees and cars. We're going to be doing some big outdoor areas, stuff like that. And a lot of the game now is based around your general strategic approach to these buildings. Where are you going to enter? What are the defenses like? Units patrol now. Enemy units will patrol around, and if they spot you, they will go to AI. When you're in a building, you can capture specific things. So if there's money in the building, or a hostage, or a VIP, you can go and capture them. And here I'm just showing kind of a little bit of the stealth stuff. So if you sneak around, you can evade your enemies. I'm just going to push those units up that corridor there. Right, so I think we got spotted in that turn. And this is just going to be a quick demonstration of how the level reacts to stuff when you get spotted. So yeah, our stealthy approach didn't really work very well there. But what you can see down here is that the units are patrolling around. As soon as you get noticed, they'll change direction and they'll go and defend sort of specific areas within the map. This is all new stuff from Frozen Synapse 1. So we're really excited about this. I think there's a lot of scope for this kind of game, running these assaults on any building and building up sort of your own missions. You're not just given a string of linear missions, you're actually deciding what you're going to do yourself and developing this strategy based on the actions of these AI forces within the city. We think that's a really exciting idea. Nobody's really done it on this scale before, we think, so hopefully it's something that people will be excited about. Right, I will just mute the sound 1 second. This is Tokyo 42, and we haven't shown any general gameplay from it in public yet. I'm just going to show you a little bit of this. So you are in this amazing miniaturized future Tokyo where the population can live forever based on their ingestion of a specific drug that's controlled by a pharmaceutical company. And you've been framed for a murder you didn't commit. You end up getting involved with some quite nefarious people like this chap who has various different expressions, and we'll get you to do missions for him. So this is just showing off some of the very early stuff. One of the things that people have said from the trailer is that the game looks a bit hectic and hard, but we do actually start you off pretty gently with just some basic stuff of kind of moving around the map. You can rotate the viewpoint as well, as you see there. So a lot of people think it's kind of a set isometric view, but it isn't. You can see stuff from any angle. So we're just going to run up here and get this weapon. And we've got a new mission now, which is to take out Seamus, who is the evil mini golf kingpin in the city. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I haven't really talked to the developers about why that is, if mini golf is going to be a major factor in the game, but we'll find out. So this is just our first mission, taking out Seamus, and he's pretty easy to take out. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit now and just show you some more of the kind of more intense stuff that happens later. This is some stealth gameplay here. This entire mission is set in this sort of giant pagoda, and you have to really be careful about getting spotted. There's so many influences in this game. There's a bit of Metal Gear Solid here. There's some Assassin's Creed. There's stuff like Worms. We have complete bullet physics, so everything's properly modelled. You can jump in the air and kind of arc your shots down, which is really cool. And the stealth section is a bit silly. Yes, you can get into big firefights if you want to. If you kill too many civilians, the cops will turn up. And there's increasing difficulty with these waves of cops. They eventually start firing rockets at you. This is me playing. I'm really terrible at the game, so it's a complete miracle I was able to survive this long. Yeah. And finally, this is a bit of multiplayer. So in multiplayer, you start off by blending into the crowd. You can change your skin to adapt, and all the time you're trying to look to see where your opponent is, see if anyone is acting suspiciously, and try and pick up ammo as well. So the player's making a dash for it there, trying to pick up some ammo. And his opponent will surely know where he is now. He spotted his opponent, put that eye icon, then you have a little firefight. Yeah, didn't work out so well. Right, thanks very much for watching that. I hope some of that was interesting. I think we're running a little bit late, aren't we? Oh, yeah. So I guess if there's time for questions. Yeah, there's. I'm getting this gesture. So if anyone does have a question, please feel free to ask. Cool. Well, that's easy then. Anyone? Oh. Yeah?
So was that influenced by Spy Party kind of thing?
I don't know if it was directly, but there's definitely some similarities there. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's not a gameplay mechanic that many people have done outside Spy Party. The question for the stream was that influenced by Spy Party, by the way, which you probably inferred from my answer. I've been told to say that. Yeah, so it's something we want to talk to the devs about that. I really want Spy Party to come out. It's been like 12 years or something. Come on, Chris, get your ass in gear. Yeah.
How large is your team generally?
How large is our team generally? Yeah.
Because obviously your first Frozen Synapse was much more sparse graphically, and then
Yeah.
you say you upped it by 2. Or at least more.
That's right. So at the moment, it's myself and my business partner Ian, who's the designer, and then we have 2 guys in-house, Robin and James. James is a programmer and a sysadmin, and Robin is a level designer and tester. Then we have some freelancers that we work with, got 1 coder and 2 artists at the moment who are freelancers. On Frozen Cortex, it was a bit bigger. We had an in-house animator as well, and stuff like that. So we were a little bit of a bigger team size, but we're trying to keep it small now, and we really like working with talented freelancers. It's really good. It kind of works out well for them and us, enables us to be flexible. So that's how we do things. I like being small. Running a big company would be really stressful. Anyone else? Yeah?
Have you got any tips for working with freelancers? Do you keep it in the same country, or does it best to go international?
Have I got any tips for working with freelancers? We've done both. It really is just about the person. So luckily, we've worked with people that I've known before quite a lot of the time, which is great because you know them personally and you can trust them. But in the case where someone hasn't, it's best to get them started off with a small but significant task that's going to be a decent test of their skills, and also sort of talk to them about it, figure out, are they going to stick to a time scale? Are they communicating with you well? Generally, if they're communicating with you well and things aren't perfect, you can get around that. But I found that really good people, the first version is normally at least extremely good, if not ready. And it is really difficult when you're testing stuff out. Obviously that costs money. You have to pay them to do a bit of the project, and if it doesn't work, you've wasted that time and money. But if you get a good person, you can work with them repeatedly, so it's worth it as an investment. So standard stuff, I guess, but yeah. Hello, there was a question.
I was going to say, what is the best way to start making your first game?
So the question is, what is the best way to start making your first game? There's a few different things that are good to read about this. There's a post by Derek Yu, who made the game Spelunky. So if you look for Spelunky or Derek Yu, how to make a game, it's called How to Finish a Game actually, but it really pertains well to sort of early development. And basically he describes how you have to pick something you want to make, something you think you can make, and something you think other people will want to play as a kind of Venn diagram. So a lot of the time you have to sort of think about that specifically if you have some ability already. If you don't have any programming ability or any art ability, you need to think about something. The normal advice is to think about something manageable you can make, but basically nobody does that. Everyone thinks about something ambitious they want to make. So just think about what you want to make and then start learning that specific skill. So if you want to do your own coding, there's lots of ways that you can start to learn games programming. Unity is a great place to start. Game Maker is a great place to start. If you want to play around with creating sort of game-like structures or interactive fiction, Twine is really good. I've started trying to learn Twine. I'm not a programmer myself, so I found that quite good. There's lots of places online that you can start, but you need to figure out the sort of the basics of what you want to try and achieve, and then look at the skills that go into that. And if you don't want to do one thing yourself, then find someone else who does want to do that, or who wants to learn along with you, like maybe someone you know already. Hope that was helpful. Anything else? We've got to wrap it up now, I'm afraid. So that was awesome. Thank you very much. It's really nice to speak to like a little audience like this. So thanks. Cheers.